Okay, there. Just getting those little pieces of things off the screen. We're trying to keep this as informal and helpful as we possibly can. Don't be afraid to ask a question, because if you have the question, 50% of the people that are on this webinar probably have the same question. It's just a matter of who's got, the willingness to type it in. So don't be afraid to ask. That's going to make the presentation that much better. So I know we've got people from a lot of different places, and the big thing for me is we're all facing the same problem. Feed is in short supply. What can you find? What can you do? How can you feed your animals to keep them healthy and productive over the winter and into next spring? One thing that I'll talk about right off the start is there is a sheep and goat management manual. The nutrition segment is the one that's probably most relevant to what we're doing right now. And you can get that by contacting the Alberta Lamb, and Ashley will help set you up with either a copy or an electronic copy of the manual. So there's some good information there. The other one that is useful, and I didn't find the proper picture for it, but Steve Mason out of Calgary also has a good sheep manual available as well. So what we're going to talk today during the presentation is, how do you take representative samples? What's quality? What's the difference in requirements for different animals and stages of production? Using multiple feeds, alternate feedstuffs, condition scoring, a little bit on early weaning, the use of Rumensin or Bovitec, and taking a second cut of hay. So feed testing is probably the most important thing that can be done this fall as we head into the feeding period. You need to test all the forages and grains and supplements that you have available. For those that are a pelleted feed or a manufactured feed, and you're getting the specifications from a feed mill or a feed company, that should be fine. They are usually within 5% to satisfy Canadian Food Inspection Agency regulations compared to what's on the label, so that we don't need to spend the extra money. But green feeds, silages, be it chopped or round bale, hay, straw, always use a forage probe. Now, if you see the gentleman standing on the upper right-hand side with that 6-foot probe, and he's pushing it into silage, if you can do that, you're a lot stronger and a lot more robust person than I am. I cheat. I use one that's run on a 3/4 horsepower drill in 3-foot sections. But there's a number of different sampling tools available. The big thing is, don't be afraid to use them. And if necessary, talk to the county offices or maybe some extension services from the different provinces or into the US. And they should have probes available for you to borrow without any problems. Now, the question is, how do you take the samples and how many? For the core samples with a forage probe, you need to take roughly 20 cores per feed type. So if you've got 4 different fields with different compositions of grass and legume in the mix, you need to submit 4 different samples. Or if you've cut the 4 fields at different times, you still need to sample each one separately. So you want to take the samples between the twines. So it doesn't matter if it's a round or a square bale or a large square, always go between the twines, because you're going across the layers or across the slices, and you get a truly representative sample. For a silage situation, either going into a pit or into a bag, you want to take 1 handful of material every load or every 2 to 3 loads as it's coming in, depending on how many tons you're getting. So you take a 20-liter or a 5-gallon pail with a lid on it out to the location where the loads are being unloaded. grab a small handful, throw it into the pail, put the lid back on, and at the end of the day, mix the sample up, fill a bread bag about 1/3 full, squeeze it tight, get the air out of it, seal it, and throw it into a freezer. You want to send silage samples, anything with higher moisture contents, you want to send it in with in a frozen state. If you have the pit or the pile full right now, go ahead and when it's open, take 10 to 15 samples or 20 samples across the face in either a W or an M shape. So you're going up and down and across the face. So you get a fairly good representative of everything that's in there. Grains and pellets, same thing. Take 10, 20, preferably 20 handfuls of product as it's being unloaded, mix it up and send a sample in as well. So what do you test for? For most of the, you have to do both the macro and the trace minerals. The main nutrients, the minimum that you need to balance a ration: moisture, protein, acid detergent fiber, which is used to calculate energy content of the feed, neutral detergent fiber, which is used to work the maximum feed intake, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, potassium, sodium, and sulfur. If you have not done it before, I would strongly recommend adding the copper, manganese, and zinc as trace minerals to be tested. There's no point doing the cobalt, iodine, and selenium. We know those are virtually non-existent in feeds in Western Canada and the Northwest US. So don't spend that $80 or $100 to get a selenium test done. We just supplement 100%. The other things, if you're using some of the crops this year as salvage crops, for example, canola, you need to do the sulfur. Working with drought-stressed cereal crops or annual crops, you should be doing a nitrate test. Some people got caught this year with the hot temperatures and thinking in 3 days they could bale up green feed bales, dry green feed bales, and some of them are heating. You can see the bales slumping. You may smell something very sweet, or you can see a darkened color when you take pieces of the bale out of the center by a hand sample. You need to do an acid detergent nitrogen, insoluble nitrogen, which indicates how much of that protein is tied to the fiber and not available to the animal. So the difference between protein or crude protein and available protein is determined by the ADIN value that you get. If you're on a gray wood soil zone, I would also be recommending asking for a molybdenum test, because we're finding that those levels that we originally thought were only a problem in Manitoba are showing up in the gray wooded soils in Alberta and northern Saskatchewan. Now, some people say that working with a forage probe or getting samples is a little bit of hard work and it's not worth it. So they'll just go ahead to the bale, grab a handful, and away they go. Now, if you do that in the wintertime when you see the snow on the ground, as you're pulling that sample out of the ground, or out of the bale rather, the green leaves are falling to the ground. And that's the best part of the feed. Those small leaves, the flowers, and that's what's being lost. So you're going to get an artificially low result, lower energy and lower protein compared to using a core sampling tool. And I'll get into the economics of that here in a couple slides. So the other thing is there's two different types of wet analysis that you can get done. Wet chemistry is the traditional method that's been around for years and years and years. The near infrared spectrometry is the newer technology. As you can see, when you compare the NIR versus the wet chem, protein and fibers, they're virtually the same. But if you look at the minerals, macro minerals that are there, you can see that you can have almost a 300% differential in what's actually in the the feed compared to what the results are. So ADF, NDF, and protein, if you want to use NIR, no problems whatsoever. But always do your wet chemistry for all the minerals and trace minerals. So we showed the difference in TDN and protein on the last sample versus for a grab versus a core sample. So late gestation late gestation ration for a mature ewe should be 65% TDN. So on the previous slide, we showed that there was a 6% difference in energy content. To compensate for that differential, you'd need to take out almost 0.85 pounds of hay and replace it with 0.85 pounds of barley. Now in central Alberta, the difference in cost right now is roughly 7.7 cents a pound. So that's adding 6.5 cents a cost per day over 90 days. That's almost $6 per ewe. If you're looking at the protein being reported 2% low, you take out 3/4 of a pound of hay, add 3/4 of a pound of peas, 5-cent cost differential. Over 90 days, that's $3.37. So you're almost looking at $10 a ewe for 90 days by not taking a proper sample. So it can get very expensive and very costly to overfeed the animals, especially in a year like this. Now, the other problem that we've had this year is a lot of dry conditions, a lot of hot temperatures. When you have that, plants will reduce sugar production. Therefore, your TDN values drop a little bit. On the other side, digestibility, for example, tall fescue, it'll drop by about 8% when it's heat stressed. Cool season grasses, more of a loss in digestibility compared to warm season legumes or even warm season cereal crops such as corn. So your cool season grasses definitely have a lower quality in that 30-35 degree temperatures. And the other thing that happens when it gets hot and dry, you get an early loss of leaves. The bottom leaves start to senesce off, they drop, they don't stay on the plant. And that is really where you lose the quality. Temperatures and moisture depend on growth rate. Having both at the same time, it makes a real problem. Understanding that of all the water that is taken up by the plant, only 1% stays within the plant. The rest of it is lost to the atmosphere. So with these high temperatures, you get a smaller stem diameter. And for sheep, that's not a bad thing because you might get a little bit more stem consumed. Unfortunately, those stems still have a higher lignification, which is part of the NDF fiber fraction. It can mature 2, 3, 4 weeks faster than normal. It's going to be a shorter crop and a faster onset of bloom. So your opportunity, your window to take that crop off at a high quality shortens, and you better be ready a lot faster than you would in a normal year to get things done. Now, saying that, what I'm seeing for feed test results this year, I've probably sent away about 50 samples already. The protein levels are up considerably, and also the TDN. And that makes sense because if the plant is that much shorter, you don't have as much stem, which is a low quality portion of the plant. So your leaf and flower ratio to stem increases. You're going to have more protein and you're going to have more TDN. But if it's left to grow too long and it gets over mature, that advantage will disappear because as a plant develops and becomes more mature, your proteins drop roughly 1 to 1.5% per week, and your TDN values will drop by 2 full points per week as well once it's past the flowering stage. We're trying to find ways to extend our feed reserves without harming the stands that we have. And harvesting second cut, especially anything with a legume in it, has to be done at the right time. For alfalfa to survive the winter, it has to have a full complement of food reserves in the root system. It'll take roughly 45 days for an alfalfa plant to regrow to 12 to 16 inches. And it'll also, at that point, or roughly at about 12 inches or 30 days, it'll start to replenish food reserves into the root system, and generally takes a full 45 days to fully recharge that root. So, rule that I provide to people that call in: don't cut 45 days prior to a killing frost. If your feed is required and you've got enough of a stand there, wait until there's 2 good frosts in September. The plants will be dormant, they will not regrow, and they'll not take food reserves out of the root system to get started again. Now, the nice thing with alfalfa is once the daylight hours start to shorten, the growth rates stop. It may be in full bloom by the time you cut it in September, but your loss of quality in the fall compared to June is much, much less. So you're still going to have a high quality product. Rough rule of thumb that I use in central Alberta is there's a no-cut time frame for alfalfa, anything from the 1st of October or 1st of August to roughly the 15th of September. Now, looking for information on nutrient requirements, it always depends on the type of animal and stage of production. What is the body condition score of the animal and the size? Is it sheltered from wind and snow? Is there enough bedding around to keep them off the ground? And what is the expectation for rate of gain? So for a mature ewe, rough rules of thumb, these are higher than what you'll find in NRC because I make adjustments for the weather, the wind. The animals are never going to be in a thermal neutral zone, so they'll never always be warm and cozy. So the protein levels and energy levels I use to create rations for Western Canada are higher, 10.5%, 13 and 17% protein for early gestation, late gestation, and after lambing. Energy levels 58, 63, and 67% TDN. If you look at it comparing to a mature cow, after calving, they only require a 65% TDN and 11% protein content. So these animals are really working hard and doing a good job. So for those that see that they might have twins, and the third one is either aborted or doesn't live very long after it's born, the original thought was you're short of energy. But with the new research that's coming out, it's also related to the amount of protein, because you may have enough energy to make, or a reasonable amount of energy, but if you don't have the protein, it can't develop the tissues and grow in utero. So these are higher than what's normally used, but I think they come a lot more in line with what's realistically needed. Nutrient requirements for lambs: creep feeders or creep feed, 17 to 18%. A starter, a couple points less. A grower, say you're 40 to 65, 70 pound animal, probably 15%. And then anything over about 70%, 70 pounds should be in a finisher ration at 14%. So what do we do with limited feeds? The most obvious is we've got crops out there that have been combined. There's a whole bunch of straw out there. Okay, oats, barley, wheat, canola, they all are basically the same for nutrient content. The only one that has a higher protein content is the pea straw. Now, you need to limit feed the straws because of the high neutral detergent fiber levels. Maximum NDF in a ration is 1.2% of body weight. as a rough estimate, or if you're calculating through sheep bites, no more than 60% MDF in the ration. When you hit that 1.2%, the rumen is full. It doesn't have room to take any more feed in. Okay, that's not a big deal. The problem comes in is when you have this feed resident in the rumen. It takes longer for the fibers to be digested so it can pass to the lower digestive systems, and therefore the feed intake in 2 or 3 days will be reduced. So if you can't get as much feed into them, you're depriving them of protein and energy and all the nutrients that they need. The other product that's being talked about a lot right now is forage seed aftermath. Treat them the same as cereal straw. You can see in this chart that your proteins and acid detergent fiber levels are very different amongst them and variable. Just because these are the averages doesn't mean that every sample is going to be the same. So, for example, a Timothy aftermath at 4.9% and a 57% TDN, I'll accept the protein content, but I find it a little bit difficult using the numbers from the ag decks at 57% TDN. Straws are typically in that 44, 45, 46% TDN range. All depends on how many leaves are left on the straw. Now, for a 160-pound mature ewe in early gestation, they will consume any place from 2.5 to 3.5% of body weight in dry matter feed intake. So, depends on the type of feed and the quality of feed. If it's a higher quality, they'll eat more. So their intake can be any place from 4 to 5.6 pounds per day. And there's a potential to include any place from 1/2 to 3/4 of a pound of straw. It doesn't seem to be much, but if you're only paying 4 cents a pound for straw and it's filling part of that need to fill the rumen, instead of using 12 or 14 cent hay, it is a significant savings. But the big thing is you must meet energy and protein requirements to prevent the loss of body condition, or potentially, if it was later on, the potential loss of a fetus. One of the colleagues that I work with, his thought on using straw is your protein digestibility is very low in cereal straw. So he does not use the protein contribution from straw at all. He leaves it behind. It just assumes a 0 value. If it's pea straw, he uses a 50% of the feed test result. The only thing you can do is monitor body condition by condition scoring the animals. And if it starts to get cold and you're down to -30, generally there's no room for straw in the ration. You're probably going to have to increase your grain content in that ration by roughly 1/4 to 1/2 a pound just to help keep those animals stay warm. Now, so far I've been talking about using straw in a early gestation ration. That's where it fits. Not suitable for growing finishing rations, late gestation, and lactating rations. The protein and energy levels are so low, reduction in feed intake creates a whole bunch of problems with getting those animals to produce milk or develop the fetuses, and therefore I would not put straw in those other rations. Slew hay, forages, seed aftermath, all of them are low quality forages, and I'll throw in here as well, if you're looking at grass screenings or some of the other screenings from an elevator or a seed cleaning plant, depending on the value of those products, I would consider them to be low quality forages, and again, use them in early gestation. And that's about where they have to fit. So adjusting your rations and monitoring your feed inventories to keep the higher quality forages for later in the feeding period this winter is probably paramount to make sure that everything still goes fine. Low quality forages, again, not an option. The big thing is, even after lambing, when you've got some better quality forages in there, you're typically going to need some grain. You may need extra protein, calcium, and magnesium to prevent tetany problems or downer ewes. Your feeds are always going to be short of trace minerals, copper, manganese, and zinc, and selenium, cobalt, and iodine. So try to find a sheep salt that has more than just cobalt and iodine in it. So, the blue salt products definitely don't fit the bill here. It's just a matter of finding the right mix when you get your test results. With the forages being mature a lot earlier this year and growing under the stress, the amount of vitamin precursors that are going to be present will probably be oxidized out of those products within 90 days of being cut. So if you cut in June, by the middle of October, a lot of those vitamin precursors are gone, and you need to start supplementing vitamins A, D, and E at that point in time. You cannot wait until the last month or month and a half of pregnancy. When you do mix salt, minerals, and vitamins, typically you'll get 15 to 25 grams intake per day. If you can, and you are feeding grain, mix all the extra ingredients in the grain and feed it to the animals in bunks or troughs or whatever feeders that you have. Animals do like grain and they will eat it. The problem with free choice use of vitamins and minerals and salt is some animals will not visit the salt station for 4, 5, 6 days, and therefore the amount that they provide or what they consume is not meeting the requirements. Now, I know that a lot of feed companies do not have copper in the mineral or in the salt because they're scared that they're going to have animals drop dead on them. But they do have a copper requirement. Most of the feeds that I see only have 3, 4, maybe 5 parts per million copper. And if you work through sheep bites, you can see that the requirements can be any place from 7 or 8 milligrams per kg. So if you find a product with 300 parts per million copper, don't run away scared. This will only provide 4.5 to 7.5 milligrams per day and increase your total copper concentration in the ration by roughly 2 to 3 milligrams total. So it's something to consider, and people have had good success with finding those minerals with the low levels of copper to provide some supplementation. Processing grains, it's not required. Sheep do a great job of chewing. I know of some producers that roll their grain for finishing rations for lambs. If you are going to process grains, do not break the kernels more than into 2 pieces. So if you're using a hammer mill, I'd rather see 5-10% of the kernels coming through whole and only getting the breakage into 2 pieces. I'd rather have it that way than having a lot of fines in the final grain mix. If you're using a roller mill, you may see 1 or 2 lines across the kernel, and it appears as if it's whole. You take a kernel, rub it between your finger and thumb, it should break into 2, maybe 3 pieces. That's optimum processing. If you want to go on the rolling index, which is a measurement of weight of whole grain versus the processed grain, the processed grain should be 70 to 75% of the original bushel weight. Getting ahead of myself here again. So The other side of the coin is we're finding a lot of barley this year, and a lot of the grains are affected by the drought. They did not put the bushel weight on. They're small, thin kernels, and you'll find that the light bushel weight is being discounted at the elevator and feedlots, if the feedlots take it at all. So with those discounts, there's an opportunity to reduce your feeding costs this winter. Now, when they looked at using lightweight grains for cattle, they went down to 37 pounds per bushel and compared it to 42, 48, and 54-pound barley. And what they found is there was no difference in animal performance at 42 pounds. Once you got below 42 pounds, there was a 1% reduction in performance per pound of bushel weight decrease. So you should be able to get the same type of response with sheep. Big thing there is watch the body condition score, watch the quality of the manure. If everything looks normal and everything's going good, then it should work. It's going to take a little bit more management this year to feed animals with a little bit of a different quality feed compared to normal years. Corn has 10% higher energy content than barley pound for pound. But unfortunately, it'll be any place from 10 to 15% less protein. This year, with it being so dry, it might even be 20% less protein than barley. It's good to replace other grains. Watch out for mold and spoilage. If you see corn with yellow, if you see corn or even hay and forages with red, blue, green, or pink molds formed, those can potentially have mycotoxins in them, and you should check it out before you feed it. Rye, wheat, and triticale, 10% higher energy and 10 to 15% higher protein than barley. It's got a faster digestion rate than barley, so therefore problems associated with acidosis, grain overloads, and bloat can occur a lot faster. Rough rule of thumb, if you are including any of these three grains, no more than 20% of the total grain portion of the ration can be rye, triticale, or wheat. Oats, some people don't like it, but I think this may be the sleeper this year. Yes, 10% less energy and 10% less protein than barley. The exception to that is if you can get some of the new varieties that came out of Saskatchewan, the University of Saskatchewan, the SO1s, or the Nasser oats, which is the SO2. It's got a high fat content, and the energy density will be the same as barley. You'll still have that protein loss or differential, but energy-wise, it can be the same. Now, working on total energy and total protein provided per bushel of grain, if you can purchase oats at $1.60 a bushel cheaper than barley, oats is your better deal. So numbers that I'm hearing right now, some areas are paying $8 to $8.50 a bushel for barley, and oats is still in that $4.75 to $5 range. So with that $3 differential, oats is definitely the better purchase. The only thing that goes against oats is the dust is very itchy when it goes down the back of your neck. Bovitec Rumensin, these are ionophores that are registered for use in sheep. It'll improve average feed conversion efficiency, average daily gain. Both of them act as a coccidiosis preventative, not a cure, but a preventative. Reduces digestive upsets and liver abscesses. And right now, with the cost of feeds, for every dollar that you spend on Rumensin or Bovitec, you'll probably get a 5-to-1 return on cost. Couple cautions: Bovitec and Rumensin should not be consumed by dogs or horses. There's a potential for them to die if they do eat these two products. So be careful with what you've got and where you're storing the feed if you do have horses and dogs on the farm. There's been a few major hailstorms that have come up over the summer. They can happen anytime. There's a potential for regrowth if the crops are not past the flowering or not past the flowering stage and not filling the kernels. Big thing is you've got to watch out for nitrates. In some situations, there's a lot of feed out there, but it's so close to the ground that you can't get at it. And with the regrowth, there's a good opportunity there to graze and use the forage without incurring any other costs for baling and hauling hay and working with it later. Now, the quality of these products can be extremely variable. You want to cut them as soon as you can to minimize leaf loss or head loss. And do not cut to scratch the ground and get dirt into the windrow, or you set your pickup too low on the silage cutter or the pickup on the baler. If you get dirt into the feed, there's a potential for white mold to form in the bales. And again, with this type of feed, you never know what the quality is. You have to feed test. Nitrates on rumens or on ruminant animals. Cows are the most susceptible. Sheep are more resistant to it. Horses, being a modified animal with only 3 stomachs, they do not have the problem. And then pigs and chickens are no trouble at all. Now, nitrates only accumulate in the leaves and stems. It does not accumulate in grain. Now, if you get a high level of nitrate, they can cause abortions or cause animals to die. You can easily, the 0.5% limit is not toxic, as you see on most of the feed test reports from the labs. They misinterpreted the data that Crawford put together in 1964. I am totally comfortable with going up to 1% nitrates or slightly higher with a proper adaptation period. First thing that'll happen is the bacteria in the rumen will improve the rate of nitrite to ammonia conversion. And the second thing, that'll probably take 3 or 4 days. And then after 2 weeks, if the nitrates are still present, more red blood cells are produced in the bone marrow so that they can transport more oxygen to the tissue. The biggest concern is when you have a light frost, or if you're using a salvage crop where they put down high levels of nitrogen to get a high yield on the cereals or canola crops. Those are the ones that could potentially cause a lot of problems. Nitrate is not a problem after a killing frost, and it is not a problem in legumes, the alfalfas, the clovers, the vetches, the sandpoints. Just a different methodology of how the root system limits the amount of nitrogen available to the plant. Now, some of the weird and wonderful stuff that could potentially be used, cull potatoes and potato byproducts. If you can find French fries that are being thrown out because of being rejected at a plant, they're good to provide to animals. Raw culled potatoes, 80% moisture. I'd suggest putting them into a silage bag and fill the silage bag and let them ensile. They'll cook, they'll turn soft, and there'll be no problems with choking. The only caution with them going into a ensiling process is put the silage bag on a slight incline so that you're filling from the bottom of the slope to the top. And once everything is sealed and they've fermented for about a week, cut a little hole in the bottom end of the bag, maybe the size of a quarter, to let the excess water drain away from the feed. Same energy content as barley, protein at 9.5. If you see a lot of green color on the potatoes as they're going in, that indicates the presence of solanines, which will impact the nervous system, digestive irritations, and other symptoms. The only thing to watch out for is if you're getting culled French fries, They can have roughly 30% fat. The maximum fat content in a ration cannot be more than 7%, because at 7%, the feed starts to slip and you can get digestive upsets because you get this artificial impaction problem. Bakery waste, cookies, breads, donuts, raw dough, spilled flour, all great feed. The only thing is, all these products have a high sugar content, and they're made from wheat flour or other rice flour or whatever it is. Very finely ground, will digest very quickly, and you can again run into that digestive upsets, bloats, or acidosis problems. So if you're using the bakery waste, probably no more than 1/2 to 3/4 of a pound per day. Brewery products, spent brewer's grains, brewer's mash, anything that they use in the brewing industry or in the ethanol industry, they can have up to 28% protein, which is great. Low calcium levels, so your supplementation will have to be fairly good. And phosphorus can be double or even triple the content that you find in average grains. So maintaining that calcium and phosphorus ratio is going to be a little bit more of a challenge. Again, some of these brewer products, higher fat content, high NDF values. So again, you're limiting the amount that you can feed. Energy, same as oats. If you're getting a wet product, you need to use it up in 2 to 4 days, because the high moisture content will start spoilage in warm conditions. When it gets down below 0, storage is less of a problem and spoilage doesn't occur. Distillers grains, be it wheat or corn, protein levels are great, 30, 39, 40% protein. Low calcium, phosphorus, again, 2 to 3 times higher than what you'll find in cereal grains. May have a higher content of salt, so you'll have to take that into consideration when you're balancing your ration. Or if you're formulating a custom mineral, you may have to reduce the salt in the mineral and force feed it just to make sure they're getting what they need. Liquid molasses or protein products, canola meal, soybean meal, and peas. Again, good products to use. Soybean is probably the most expensive to use. Calcium levels are a little bit better, but your phosphorus levels are up much more as well. So it's another option that you have. It's just watch your cost per head per day. I am getting a lot of questions of using liquid molasses on straw bales. And most of them are in the cattle industry, but there's an odd one that they're looking at it for sheep as well, especially in that early gestation period. Now, this product shows up every time that feed supplies are tight or expensive, or when people need to use low quality forages in the ration. And the misconception that I have troubles with is producers feel good that they're doing something to help feed the sheep. But unfortunately, a lot of times what they're told is from the salesman that's an expert, quotation marks, in nutrition, because he wants to sell the product. So I picked up a label, put the specifications here on this slide, and what they would do is typically you apply someplace between 70 and 100 pounds of liquid molasses on a 1,000-pound bale of straw. Your cost of the molasses, when I put this slide together, I heard 25 cents. Talked to a gentleman this afternoon, it's already up to 31 cents. So a 160-pound ewe can eat 1 pound of straw per day, giving them 0.1 pounds of molasses per day as a maximum intake. So what does that do to the nutrient profile? Protein, yeah, it goes up from 18 grams to 39, which is 12 to 27%. That is a help. The one that really sticks out in my mind is virtually no energy in this product. Calcium will go up, or calcium does not go up in this product because of the label that I had. Phosphorus go up. But if you look at the percentage points of how much they're actually getting or what the improvements are on the nutrients, spending 3, 4, 5 cents a day for the molasses, you can supplement these products a lot cheaper. If you look at the trace mineral side, generally copper, manganese, and zinc. This was just a label that I found. There was no specification on what species it could be fed to, but you've got to be careful with your copper levels in some of these products. Manganese and zinc, generally reasonably good for supplementing a portion. Vitamins are typically high. Vitamin E, unfortunately, is a product that's very expensive, and they do not like to put it into the product. So watch the labels there. So if you are feeding a pound of straw with the molasses on it, you're going to have to put something else in there, 2.5 pounds of hay and probably 1.5 pounds of barley. Add to the grain mix, depending on the quality of the forage. You might have to add some extra limestone. You might have to add some extra magnesium. But typically, you're going to be looking at 7-8 grams of vitamin E to bring levels up to where it needs to be. In this situation, with a grain straw ration in early gestation, a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 mineral will not work. You need to have something with a lot higher calcium level, or if you are using a 2-to-1 mineral, you're going to have to add extra limestone to make it work. Again, watch the total supplementation of copper. This is something that they did at the University of Alberta back in 2002, where they limited the amount of forage that was being fed to cattle during early pregnancy, and then they changed them to an after calving ration. What they found was they were able to maintain proper body condition and no problems with calving or calving health. And birth weights were the same between cows that were fed full hay ration or one that had a reduced dry matter intake. What they recommend is a minimum of 1% forage intake to maintain rumen function. But again, this is something that was done for cattle. I have never seen any results on a similar study for sheep. So I would use this with a real big amount of caution. Creep feeding the lambs, always great to do. You'll get the extra gain, get them onto the grain ration, or them willing to take a grain. Improves the gains on these animals and marbling score. And when these calves are weaned and putting into a background program, it'll reduce the sickness by about 90% because it's not a change in feedstuffs, not they should have a good idea of what grain is when they finish eating the creep feed. Only thing they have to worry about is the environment, where to sleep, where to find the feed, where to find the water. So it does help by feeding them the extra amount. Now this is, again, something that I found from cattle, but the same thing applies to sheep, is when you want to start providing creep feed to these calves is when the nutrient requirement or milk requirement by the lamb exceeds what the milk availability is from the ewe or ewe lamb, and it just keeps that animal growing properly. Some homemade creep rations that are out there. If you're looking for a 16% creep ration, 40% barley, 40%, 20% distillers grains, or 30% barley, 30% oats, 40% peas. Another product that is showing up on the market in limited amounts is barley malt sprouts. Basically, when they sprout the barley at the maltsters, it still has 22, 23% protein. So 30% barley, 30% oat, and 40% malt sprouts works. Again, work with your local feed supplier or some of these feed manufacturers and see what works in your situation.
Barry, there's a question that came through the chat box if you wanted
Sure.
to take it.
Yep, go ahead. Chat box. Okay, sheep. The question I've got is, what about sheep licks? And that's when I was talking about the molasses tubs or lick tubs or blocks or the pour-on products, that's exactly what I was talking about. So it's something that can be used, but pencil out the cost of what you're going to pay per day and what you're actually getting from the product that you're using. So one of the easiest ways to do that is get a copy of the Sheep Bites Ration Balancer program through Alberta Lamb Producers. The website is there. It's what I use to balance ration for clients. The cost for the first year is $100. Subsequent years are $50. And then if you're a commercial nutritionist or from a feed company, the cost is double. But you can also go on there and look at the demonstration version and see what's available. It's great to balance the ration, but it also, if you put your prices of the feed in there, it will tell you how much it's costing you per head per day. It is not a least cost formulator, but if you play with the numbers, the amount being fed, you can manipulate those numbers to minimize your feed costs as close as you can. It'll tell you how much inventory you're going to need for bales of hay, tons of silage, bags of mineral, bushels of grain for the different stages. And also it'll give you an indication on a composite or as a summary at the end when you're finished the different types of animals. You'll get an inventory summary of what you're going to need for the winter feeding period. Great tool. It's something that took about 2.5 years to get all the bugs out of it and put it together. There's a few things that I'd like to see a little bit differently, but it's functional and accurate to the last edition of NRC nutrient requirements of small ruminants. So it is something that can be used. Any other questions? Because I am basically done. This is my contact information. I am an independent nutritionist. My phone number and email is there if anybody wants to get a hold of me. And also, I've got a website as well to give an indication of all the different services that I provide. The website is mainly geared towards beef cattle, but whenever you see beef cattle in there, just strike it out and put sheep in, and the same types of service are available.
There's 2 questions that came through, Barry, in the chat box.
Okay. My chat box disappeared on me.
Do you see it at the bottom of the screen? If you were to click on the chat again, it should pop up.
Oh, if I could see it, I'd do it.
The one question was corn stover ?
Okay, corn stover, I would treat it the same as cereal straws. The only differential there is if the person putting up the corn had a combine that left a lot of cobs behind, then you're going to have a higher quality product. Good feed, again, depending on how many cobs and how much corn is corn is on the cob. it will be better than straw, but still potentially short of protein. No question about that.
And another question is, can you expand more on legumes not having nitrate problems?
Sorry, I missed that.
Can you expand more on legumes not having nitrate problems?
Oh, absolutely, for sure. With the annual crops, the barleys, the oats, and the peas, or barley and oats and wheat, if there is high nitrate content in the soil, it gets mineralized and gets into the water in the soil zone. They are pushed up into the plant without any regulation. Legumes, peas, lentils, clovers, anything that has the presence of a nodule in the root zone. And those are those little pink nubs or growths that are off the side of the rumen. They regulate the amount of nitrogen that's going into the plant. So if there's excess amount of nitrogen in the soil, it's stored in the nodule. And it only releases what the plant needs on a daily basis. So that's why legumes cannot accumulate nitrate, or generally do not accumulate nitrate. I've seen 2 cases in 38 years, and in both situations, the person went ahead and put on 7, 8, 9,000 gallons of liquid pig manure after they took the first cut, and then took a second cut, later in the summer. The availability of all that nitrogen, there was no way the nodules could keep it out of the plant, so that's why they had the problem. But generally, 99.99%, you do not have a nitrate problem with legumes.
Okay, the next up, there's a couple more questions. The next one is, what about alternative supplements like poplar, willow leaves? Is there much nutrition in that? I have just seen this as an alternative as well this year.
If they were goats, they could probably use 15 to 20% browse in their ration. But for sheep and cattle, no. It's just the lignin content, the NDF content is extremely high. The quality is so low, they just cannot fit into a good ruminant ration.
Okay, the next question is oat hulls compared to straw.
Oh, that's one I missed. Thank you for that. Oat hulls are generally the hulls off the oats, plus all the split kernels and small particles that are cleaned out during the making of a high quality oat groat, can be 6, 7, 8% protein, 55 to 60% TDN. I've seen cows actually get fat on oat hulls if they were fed free choice. But yes, it can be part of the ration. Absolutely a good feed. And cost right now is a lot less than barley or oats.
Okay, the next question that came in is, you mentioned being unable to get away from feeding grain in lactation. We've always fed barley for lactation, but wondering if a good alfalfa hay would be adequate this year.
Okay, let me just go back. Wish I had an easier way to do this. I apologize. Okay, looking at the nutrient requirements after lambing, you need 67% TDN. Most of the time, your energy content in a good quality alfalfa hay or an alfalfa grass hay may go up as high as 62, 63%. So unless it's an exceptional quality, you're still going to need grain after lambing. If you don't maintain body condition on the ewes, milk production suffers, growth rates on the lambs suffer. So it's count on feeding some portion of grain this year, for sure.
Next question is, what would you recommend for poundage per ewe in a ration for late gestation ewes using corn, silage, alfalfa, corn, oats, and beet pulp?
Okay, beet pulp is a product that is high fiber. typically used in the in a dairy cow ration, so that she ruminates more and does a lot more chewing to produce saliva to help maintain a better pH, or as a buffer, so that they don't have acidosis problems. If you've got a reasonable amount of long forage in there, I don't see the need for beet pulp. If it works for you, I'm not going to say no, but it's something to look at. Now, for me to give you a number for what's going to be fed to a ewe, did you say lactation or late gestation?
Late gestation.
Oh boy. And I'm going to assume that the ewe is going to be someplace around 160 pounds. So in 2 seconds here, I just want to look at, okay, I'm not going to find it. You're probably looking at roughly a pound of barley a day. 2 seconds here, 160. Probably about 3.5 to 4 pounds of hay. Might need up to 1.5 pounds of barley. Or if you're looking at that 1 pound of barley, maybe 0.5 pound of beet pulp. And the other, you were talking, the other, was there silage in there too or not?
It was corn silage, alfalfa, corn, oats, and beet pulp.
Okay. When you're looking at replacing dry hay with a silage at 65% moisture, you need to feed 2.4 pounds of silage to replace 1 pound of hay at 15% moisture. So I'm going to just do a little bit of scribbling here. 60. 5.6. Sorry, folks, I'm just got 1 pound of barley or corn. You're looking at probably 10 pounds of corn silage. Let's go 1/4 pound of beet pulp. And you're probably going to need roughly 1/2 pound of some sort of protein, be it distiller's grains, canola meal, distillers, brewers grains. And that'll get you close to where you need it. Again, it all depends on what the feed test results come back at, the condition of the ewe. And this is where this is a rough estimate, but to do it properly with the feed test, you'd have to run it through sheep bites for sure.
Okay, the next question is, will sheep eat cattail? What is the nutrition?
Cattails, probably one of the lowest quality feeds around. They may eat it because they're curious, but TDNs of 35%, proteins in that 2 to 3% range, I consider it to be worse than straw.
Okay. The next question is late grazing a grass/alfalfa hay field a better option than doing a second cut? Still wait until after too heavy frost to graze?
I guess the answer to that one is, how tall is the crop? If it's only a foot high, you'll probably get more feed by grazing it rather than trying to cut it, because a lot of times those thin windrows fall through the stubble and you can't pick them up. If you do pick them up, you're getting a lot of dirt into the windrow or into the bale, and you got white mold problems. The only suggestion that I'd have, if you are grazing it, use an electric fence limit their access so that they clean up one area of the field before they go to the next, and try to leave 3 to 4 inches of stubble in the field so it catches snow and the plants aren't, you're not starting off with a bare field next spring. The other thing is, if we do get some late season rain, and I understand that the Lethbridge area, southern Alberta, got up to 2 inches of rain yesterday, there are sprouts or tillers coming off the alfalfa at this time of year, and that is required for developing the stems and the growth next year. So if the sheep get in there, you graze it off the ground, you take off those little sprouts or those little growths, it's going to reduce the amount of alfalfa that's going to grow next spring.
The next question is, I read somewhere to avoid potatoes for sheep. Sprouted ones can be toxic to sheep and cause birth defects. You mentioned green ones impacted nervous system, but curious as to safety to feeding these in general.
Okay, that is a great comment. What I'll do, Ashley, is I will do some more research on that. And what I'll do is I will send you the response. And if you can distribute it to everybody that's on the list that's signed up for this, we'll get a definitive answer for them.
Sounds good. Next question is no barley in the ration.
Is that due to a lack of barley available, or they just don't want to use grain?
I'm not sure. Adam, are you able to clarify? You can turn yourself off mute. No barley available.
Oh boy. Yeah. The only thing you can do to mitigate that problem is ensure that the ewes are in good condition before winter hits. The fat layer or that's present right under the hide is a great insulator. It'll prevent the loss of energy, of heat from the ewes or from the lambs. The wool will also help as well, but you still need that fat under there, and that will reduce the energy requirement of the animal. So that will help mitigate the problem of having no barley. If you can, up to lambing, you can make a ration work without grain. It's typically after lambing when you need to get that extra 20%, 25% more protein and energy into the ewes, and they can't eat enough to make it work. So keep on hunting, talk to the neighbors, talk to grain brokers. They sometimes run into situations where they can find low quality feeds, and they put it onto their websites and put it up for sale at a discount. So unfortunately, a lot of times that's 42 metric tons at a time in a super bee. So if you only got 25 or 30 ewes, that'll take you probably 40 years to feed out. So just keep on looking. I don't have a good answer for that one.
Okay, the next question was, Ontario sheep farmers did a study on using leaves as a forage substitute. It did meet the requirements of dry ewes.
It did or did not?
It did meet the requirements of dry ewes.
That's something I've learned today. So thank you for that tip. I really don't know what to say on that one, but thank you. I appreciate the information.
Oh, sorry. It's online if anybody wants to look at it. Just thought I would share that. I just also wanted to share that we just took February, March lambs out that were on grain and grazed them. And they, for whatever reason this year, because it was so dry, they did not eat the grass at all. They didn't want it. And they just ate, I would say 85% browse. We were shepherding them, so we had lots of opportunity to observe. And I actually weighed them before and after. It was a veg management project. And they didn't lose weight. They gained very little or held their own. And that was coming off grain. So I was really surprised at that. I just thought I would share that.
Thank you, Darlene, for that. There's another question. Is there anything from garden waste or alternative feeds that can be toxic and avoided?
With the solanines in the potatoes, I really don't know of anything as garden waste that would cause a problem.
Okay.
The only one there that I might want to look at is, again, I'll send it to Ashley, potato tops. I will check that out as well and get that information to Ashley as well.
Okay, and we'll take this one last question that's in the chat box, just because I'm looking at time and we are going over. But this last question was, where do we send the feed samples? What is the cost?
There are a number of different labs available across Canada. Some of the ones that I'm familiar with, Stratford, Agri-Analysis in Stratford, Ontario. You've got A&L Labs in London, Ontario. Central Testing Lab in Winnipeg. Down to Earth Labs in Lethbridge. Nutralytical in Calgary. There's one in Abbotsford, BC, or in the lower mainland BC, Cumberland Valley. Just look on the webs, just type in feed analysis labs. There's a bunch that are listed there. Also, if you have the access to the BCRC website, Beef Cattle Research Council, they just put out a list of feed testing labs on their website about 2 weeks ago. The one thing I'll say is do a little bit of shopping. Some labs can be relatively reasonable in cost, and some of them are very expensive. So do the shopping.
Well, thank you very much, Barry, and to all of our participants who joined us this evening. For the participants, if you do have any questions that come to mind that you might not have felt comfortable enough to ask, or you think of something after, don't hesitate to reach out to Barry directly. He did have his contact information on the last slide. And so with that being said, this does conclude our webinar. I will be sending an email to everybody who registered for this evening's session that will include a link to where you can access the webinar recording. So thank you very much again, Barry. I don't know if you can see in the chat box, but there's lots of producers who are thanking you for the great presentation.
Yeah, no, I can't see any of that, unfortunately, but